The mountains still wore their white caps that evening, though spring had begun its slow crawl through the valley. The snowmelt ran down the slopes in silver threads, whispering through the pines. Out of that wilderness came a man with a limp and a dented tin pail, shoulders hunched beneath a coat long gone to shreds. His name was Jonas Thorne, though most in town had long stopped saying it aloud. They only called him the Mountain Man. He came down from the ridge as the sun bled its last light across the clouds, each step sinking into thawing mud. There was a hollow look in his eyes, something that spoke of hunger deeper than food. Smoke drifted from the town chimneys below, and his chest tightened at the thought of voices, of faces turned away. He had not spoken to a soul in weeks, maybe months. That night all he wanted was milk. He entered the town slow, careful as a sinner stepping into church. The lamps were lit, and women closed their shutters when they saw him. A child pointed, but her mother tugged her away. At the general store, Mrs. June Weller stood behind the counter, her gray bun sharp as her words. "Back again, Thorne? Don't you have goats up there?" she asked, eyes narrow. Jonas kept his gaze low. "They died this winter," he said quietly. "Just need a little milk." "I can pay," Mrs. Weller snorted. "Pay? With what? Ghost stories?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Go on, before folks start thinking you're looking for more than milk." He turned without another word, the weight of her scorn heavy as a yoke. The bell above the door jangled behind him, cruel in its cheer. The night air bit at his face as he stepped back onto the empty road. The town lights faded behind him until only one remained, a warm glow from a farmhouse window on the edge of town. There he saw Clarabelle Harlow, sleeves rolled up, milking her cow by lantern light. Her face was calm but worn, her movements steady as prayer. She'd been alone since her father passed, just her niece, and the land that didn't always love her back. Jonas stood at the gate for a long moment, hat in hand, trying to summon courage. When he finally spoke, his voice came rough, almost breaking. "Ma'am," he said, "I'll pay what I can. Just need a little milk." Clara looked up, startled at first. The lantern's glow caught the weariness in his face, the mud on his boots, the tremor in his hands. She studied him the way one studies a wounded animal, half wary, half pitying. Then she nodded. "Bring your pail," she said simply. In the barn, the world seemed smaller, quieter. The lantern hummed faintly, and the cow shifted with a gentle sigh. Clara poured milk from her tin jug into his pail, the pale stream glistening in the warm light. Jonas stood still, unsure whether to speak or breathe. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, just a whisper of touch, soft as the falling dust motes between them. He froze, startled by the warmth of it. "Thank you." "Ma'am," he murmured. "It's just milk," she said, but her tone held something kinder. "You can come again if you need." He nodded once, eyes lowered, and walked into the fog with the pail clutched tight. The sound of his boots faded into the night until all that was left was the soft clinking of metal and the echo of her heartbeat. By morning, the town already knew. "Clara Harlow's feeding that hermit now," Mrs. Weller whispered across the counter. "First milk, then who knows what." The sheriff, Cade Ellison, came by that afternoon, leaning against her fence with an awkward smile. "Clara," he said gently, "you're kind, but folks talk. You don't owe that man anything." She wiped her hands on her apron, meeting his gaze without blinking. "A hungry man ain't a threat, Cade. A heart closed off is." The sheriff sighed and tipped his hat. "You've always had a way with words, Miss Harlow. Just be careful." When he rode off, Clara stood by the fence a long time, staring toward the ridge. The wind came down from the mountains sharp and cold, and for a moment she imagined Jonas up there, alone, drinking the milk slowly, maybe sitting by a small fire in the dark. She wondered what shame felt like when it had no one left to answer to. Each night after that, she left an empty tin pail near the fence. She told herself it didn't mean anything, just a small kindness, a thing her father would have done. Days passed, and the pail remained untouched. Then one morning it was gone. The absence of it startled her more than she expected. When she went into town that afternoon, the whispers followed her like shadows. She heard the words hermit and widow twist together in ugly ways. But she kept her chin up, eyes straight ahead. The world had taken much from her already. It would not take her decency, too. That night, she found another pail at the fence. Her same one, cleaned, dent-smoothed, tied with a bit of rough twine. Inside, there was a single carved feather made of pine wood, no bigger than her palm. It smelled faintly of smoke. She lifted it gently, her throat tightening. The lantern light caught its edges, and for a moment it seemed alive, something small, made with care, offered in silence. Inside her house, as she set the carving by the window, she whispered softly to no one. Maybe there's still some good left up there after all. The moon rose over the ridge, silvering the fields. Somewhere far in the dark, a man sat alone, thinking of the way her hands looked in the light, and how he'd forgotten what human warmth felt like. The narrator's voice might have said then, "We think kindness is simple, until it costs us something, until it risks our peace, our pride, our name. But mercy doesn't count the cost. It simply fills the pail, one trembling act at a time. And that's how it began, not with love, not even with hope, but with a single touch in a barn, and a woman brave enough to offer milk to a man the world had already condemned. The storm came without warning, roaring down from the mountains like an old grief. Rain fell hard enough to sting, turning the valley roads to rivers. Clara watched from her porch, her shawl wrapped tight, thinking of the ridge and the man who lived too close to the sky. She tried to busy herself, stacking firewood, sealing windows, but every gust of wind seemed to carry his name. By dusk, lightning cracked across the hills. Something small and dented rolled into her yard. A tin pail. The same one. She ran out through the rain, heart thudding, and found a scrap of bark tied to the handle. The words carved into it were shaky, uneven. "Owe you more than milk." She lifted her head, and there he was, half-collapsed near the fence, soaked to the bone. His hair dripped into his eyes, his face pale from cold. For a moment he looked ready to turn away, as if ashamed to need her again. But Clara crossed the mud between them before he could move. "Jonas," she said, voice trembling but firm, "come inside, please." He hesitated, then nodded once. The storm swallowed them both. Inside, her small kitchen flickered with firelight. The smell of damp wool and rain filled the air. Jonas sat near the hearth, staring into the flames like a man afraid they might judge him. Clara wrung out her hair and handed him a towel. "You shouldn't have come through that," she said quietly. "Didn't mean to," he muttered. "River rose faster than I thought." He looked down at his hands, raw, shaking. "Didn't want to bother you." Clara smiled faintly. "You're not a bother, Jonas Thorne." He looked up at her then, truly looked, and something unguarded flickered behind his eyes. The rain softened outside, and the world felt smaller, warmer. He began to speak in pieces, not like a confession, but like a man emptying what he couldn't carry anymore. "There was a fire," he said after a long silence. "Winter night. My brother and I, drunk, angry. We'd both loved the same woman once. Words turned to shouting. The lamp fell." His voice broke. He didn't make it out. "Folks said I started it. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't care enough to stop it." He stared at the flames, jaw tight. "I've been trying to pay for it ever since." Clara stood near the table, her hands clasped. The room hummed with quiet. "You came down for milk," she said finally, her tone neither soft nor hard. "Not forgiveness. Maybe that means you still want to live." Jonas blinked, startled by the simplicity of it. "I don't know what I want anymore." She poured him a cup of coffee and set it in his hands. "Then start there. Warmth first. The rest comes later." He nodded, the smallest hint of peace flickering across his face. Days passed. The storm cleared, leaving the valley washed clean. Jonas stayed to help mend the fence, patch the roof, and cut wood for the stove. The work was quiet, but it filled the silence between them with something that felt almost like comfort. People noticed. When Sheriff Ellison rode by, he stopped at the gate, watching Jonas split logs. "Didn't think I'd see you this close to town again," he said. "Didn't plan on it," Jonas replied, voice steady. Clara came to the porch, wiping her hands. "He's helping me fix what the storm broke." she said evenly. Nothing more to it. The sheriff's eyes softened. Maybe nothing more is exactly what this place needs, he said, and tipped his hat before riding off. Still, the gossip grew. Mrs. Weller saw Jonas in town once, buying nails and salt, and told anyone who'd listen that he was charming the widow with pity and sin. But the words didn't bite as deep anymore. Clara had found a strange stillness in herself, a quiet that came from knowing the truth and needing no one's permission to hold it. Each evening, Jonas left small things on her porch: a carved bird, a smoothed stone, a tiny wooden spoon for Ellie Mae. He never said much, but every gesture spoke like prayer. One morning, Clara found him standing by the barn, watching the sunrise through the mist. "Looks different from down here," he said softly. "What does?" "The world," she smiled. "Maybe it's just the milk in your coffee," he chuckled, low, rough, real. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh. But peace in the West never lasted long. The storm's lightning had left the barn roof weak. A week later, another crack of thunder rolled through the night, and the dry wood caught fire like kindling. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. By the time she ran outside, the flames were already climbing, devouring the rafters. The animals screamed inside. She tried to open the latch, but the heat drove her back. Panic flooded her veins. "Ellie!" she shouted. "Stay inside!" Then, through the chaos, a shadow came running down from the ridge, barefoot, soaked in rain, a single axe in hand. Jonas. He didn't hesitate. He threw his shoulder into the barn door, splintering it open. The heat hit him full in the face, but he pressed on, leading the horses out one by one, coughing, eyes streaming with smoke. When the roof began to cave, he stumbled, falling hard into the mud. Clara ran to him, grabbing his arm, dragging him clear just as the barn collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks. Rain poured down again, hissing on the embers, as if heaven itself had decided to spare what little they had left. Jonas lay gasping, burned along his arms, clothes blackened. She cradled his head in her lap, her tears mixing with the rain. "You saved what's left of me," she whispered. He opened his eyes weakly, voice barely a rasp. "No, ma'am. You did that first." Dawn broke on a valley changed by fire. The barn was gone, but the animals lived. So did Jonas. The townsfolk came to see what had happened, their eyes full of questions. They saw him, burned, bandaged, standing beside Clara as she shoveled the last of the ashes. For once, no one spoke ill. Even Mrs. Weller looked away, her lips pressed thin. Sheriff Ellison nodded at Jonas. "Guess the mountain ain't the only place you belong anymore." Jonas said nothing, just glanced at Clara, who met his gaze with a small, quiet smile. In the weeks that followed, the farm became a place of murmured beginnings. The barn was rebuilt plank by plank, and Jonas's laughter began to sound less like surprise and more like living. Clara would sit with him in the mornings, sharing coffee, the mountains rising in mist behind them. Ellie played with the wooden sparrow Jonas had carved, making it fly across the table. There were no confessions, no declarations, only presence. A steady kind of peace that asked for nothing but time. When the wildflowers bloomed again, Jonas fixed the old pail and hung it on a nail by the porch. It gleamed in the sunlight, polished bright. Clara asked, smiling, "Keeping it for milk?" He shook his head. "For remembering." And perhaps that was all this story was ever meant to be, a remembrance of small mercies that save us quietly, without anyone noticing. "Some hearts," the old narrator would whisper then, "don't heal from grand gestures. They mend through small acts poured steady. Like milk into a tin pail, warm, undeserved, but enough." That summer, when travelers passed through and asked who lived in the valley house by the ridge, they were told just a woman and a man who learned how to start over. And if you stood by that fence at sunset, you could still see them sitting side by side, hands resting close but not quite touching, faces turned toward the hills. The kind of closeness that doesn't need words, because it's already known. "Remember this, dear soul," the narrator says softly. "It's never the mighty who mend the broken. It's the gentle hands, the ones that touch without demand, that teach the shamed how to live again. And sometimes all it takes is filling one pail with grace.